Okay, so we're doing number properties today, or properties of numbers. There are three main categories that we're going to talk about today, and one that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay. So first category that we're going to talk about is these are properties of equality. Okay. We use properties of equality when we use them a lot, but we use them mostly to solve equations. Okay. And these are kind of, a lot of these beginning ones kind of seem silly or obvious, but they're important and we have to go through them. The first one, the silliest of them all, is the reflexive property. Okay. For each of these we're going to go through, we're going to say what it means in words, what it means in symbols, and then numbers. The reflexive property in words means any quantity is equal to itself. Okay. Now, like I said, that's the most obvious one. It's the silliest, but it's important. So x equals x. Shocking, I know. Or 5 equals 5. Okay. I know, it's not complicated stuff here. The other one you'll see is like 4 plus 7 equals 4 plus 7. So notice the order doesn't matter, or the order doesn't change. And the order matters. It doesn't change. It just means left side's the exact same as right side. The second property is the symmetric property. So it's slightly less silly than reflexive, but we'll see. Symmetric property states that if one value equals the second value, then the second value equals the first. So the first equals the second equals the first. Okay. You might see this one written, if A equals B, then B equals A. Okay. If left equals right, right equals left. Okay. In this example, we'll say, we'd say that if 2 plus 6 equals 8, then 8 equals 2 plus 6. Okay. Or if x equals 6, then 6 equals x. This property is actually pretty important when we're solving equations. It allows you to flip the sides of the equation. So you could flip the left and the right sides of any equation. Okay. Which is very important, especially when we're setting up, or if we like having our variables on the left side. So that one's important, but it seems silly to define. It's kind of obvious. All right, the third property of equality is called the transitive property. Okay. This property, it sounds the best. It sounds fancy. Okay. It makes you seem smart if you could repeat it. All right, and I'm sure you're familiar with this property. If A equals B and B equals C, okay, you could probably finish it, then A equals C. Okay. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Okay. Transitive property. Our example will say if x equals 5 and 5 equals 2 plus 3, then x equals 2 plus 3. Okay. And this one, if you think about it, makes the most sense. Okay. One thing equals something else, but that something else also equals another thing. Then the first and the last are equal. The last property of equality is the substitution property. This one's very, very useful and will be very useful for us in the future. Substitution property states that any value can be replaced for its equal. Okay. Any value can be replaced by its equal. So if A equals B, then that B value, wherever you see A, you could replace it with B whenever you want. Okay. So So if A equals B, then B can replace A anywhere. Now, the most basic form that we'll see is something like if you have 4 plus 6, the quantity 4 plus 6 times x. Well, we know 4 plus 6 is 10. We know, 4 plus 6 equals 10. So instead of writing 4 plus 6, we replace it with 10. Okay? And vice versa. You replace 10 with 4 plus 6 wherever you want because they are equal. The second category of properties that we're going to talk about are the addition properties. There's two of them. Okay. And again, these also are kind of silly and obvious and things you learned way back when, but it's important for us to redefine these. Okay. First one being the additive inverse. The additive inverse states that a value plus its opposite is 0. Okay, well, what's the opposite of a value? Well, the opposite of the number is its negative version. Okay. The opposite of a variable is the negative version of that variable. So if you have w plus negative w, okay, we don't know what w is, but it's a value plus its opposite, that's going to equal 0. So likewise, 5 plus negative 5 equals 0. That's going to be important when we solve equations. The second additive property is the additive identity property. Okay. Now the identity is yourself. So any identity property states the same thing. How does something not change? How does it remain the same? So in addition, how do you keep a value the same? Well, you add 0 to it. Okay. So the additive identity states that the sum of any value and 0 remains that value. And again, this is really basic stuff here. X plus 0 is x. 5 plus 0 is 5. That one's easy. So again, identity properties always stay. How does that value stay the same? Okay. And the third category, and the last category we're going to do right now, is properties of multiplication. Multiplication properties. There's 3. 2 of them are very similar to the additive properties. The first one being the multiplicative inverse property. Okay, we already had the additive inverse property. The additive inverse property said, how do we get, a number plus itself is 0. The multiplicative inverse isn't about 0. The inverse, or the opposite of a multiplication problem, is called the reciprocal. Okay. So the product, this property states that the product of a value and its reciprocal is 1. It's always 1. So a number times its reciprocal is 1. Well, what's the reciprocal? It's kind of the flipped version of that number or of that value. So if you have a times the reciprocal, which is 1 over a, you get 1. Okay. So that's the reciprocal of a whole number, 1 over that whole number. The reciprocal of a fraction is you just flip the top and the bottom. So x over y times y over x equals 1. Okay. So 1 over a number is its inverse, or just completely flip top and bottom of a fraction. The second property of multiplication is the multiplicative identity. Okay. Much like the additive identity. How do we get a multiplication? How do we get a number to stay the same through multiplication? Okay. So this one should be obvious as well. Because we know that anytime you multiply a number by 1, that number stays the same. So the product of any value and 1 remains that value. And again, some obvious examples. X times 1 is x. Okay. 5 times 1 is 5. Okay. Again, just really obvious things. And the last property of multiplication is the multiplicative property of 0. multiplicative property of 0 states that the product of any value and 0 is 0. Okay, again, this one's a basic multiplication fact. Anything times 0 is 0. X times 0 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. Okay, anything times 0 is 0. Okay. So again, those are the properties. It seems basic, but they are important, and you do have to know them